Hi, everyone. Welcome to the final episode of our summer school. And today we're going to talk about feature busters and deciding what to build to maintain and when it's time to bust a feature for good. Um, so, for today, what you can expect to learn about is we're going to talk about deciding which features to introduce into your product. Second, how to sort of check feature health. Is it still okay? What should I do with it? Is it adding value to our customers, users, and our organization itself. And finally, a very important one, which I don't think is talked about enough, when and how to remove a feature from a product or an application. My name is Jesse. I'm the co-founder of Triggre. I am responsible for product and marketing. I have a master's in software engineering with a specialization in software architecture. I'm the co-founder of three previous SaaS companies, of which my first was at 19 years old while I was in university. And with these companies, I've served customers from the enterprise range all the way through SMBs. So today we are live, and that means that you can leave a comment if you have a question, and that will pop up for us, and we'll pick it up at the end during our Q&A session. So don't feel shy. If you have a question about anything, if you think something's not clear, please feel free to ask, and then I'll get back to it towards the end of this session. Okay, let's start by talking about some feature introductions. How do you do that? So introducing a feature, or rather deciding to introduce a feature, is a much more intricate process than simply building it and then shipping it to your users. And it all starts with prioritizing the features that we are considering to build. So in order to make a good prioritization of features, we need to order them, right? We need to have a way to order the features from, let's say, most wanted to less wanted or least wanted. And I usually use three main categories for this: duration, value, and product. So in each of these sort of main categories, there are many specific categories that you can prioritize a feature on. For example, development duration is an important aspect that we can take into account. Right? So how long does it take to develop a feature? An estimation, of course, on that. Implementation time is another one. How long does it take once the feature is there? How long does it take to sort of get adopted by a customer or by a user? Does it take long? Does it require a lot of learning, for example? The education needed when the feature is there. So do they need to get a certificate to use it, etc., or is it just you release it and they're ready to go? That's also an important aspect. The expected lifetime of a feature is also very important. So how long will the feature stay relevant, right? Important to take into account. And you can come up with many more similar duration type categories that you could score on. When we look at value, we can think of total cost of ownership. So how much does it cost to maintain the feature, to run it for your users? What does it cost? Things like maybe it will lower constant costs for us. Maybe it will lower dynamic costs for us. Maybe it will increase the customer lifetime. If the customer lifetime is longer, then a user will, if it's a customer, they will be of more value to our organization. A higher willingness to pay for customers can also be interesting. So maybe a feature that is added on it will increase the willingness to pay for certain customers. That could be interesting because we might be able to get more out of existing customers. And then finally, you can think of many more relevant value-based categories. But this is just to give you an idea of which ones you can think of. And then in the product category, you have things like improved user experience. So maybe your product is in need of some improvement in the user experience in certain areas, and that's something that you might want to score on. You can think about increased stability for your product, for example. That can also be a value that might be important. You can think about how many times a feature is requested. Maybe a lot of customers have been asking about this feature, and you want to offer them the feature because many customers want it, and maybe this is combined with a higher willingness to pay. Or what is also important, lowering your technical debt. Sometimes it might be just a feature that sort of lowers the technical debt. It sort of restructures some parts of your application or product. And that can also be something that may be important to you at some point. And there's obviously also in this category more that you can think of. You don't have to prioritize in all of these, right? Because there can be virtually limitless lists of these. But depending on the strategic goals of your organization, you just choose a few. And I would always choose at least one from these categories because they sort of complement each other. And the ones that I would always use are development duration and total cost of ownership, and then at least one out of the product category. Ultimately, of course, it all depends on the goals of your organizations, which ones you should choose. So let's say, as an example, for our organization, development time, total cost of ownership, and the improvement of user experience are important, right? These are things that we want to take into consideration when we implement features. And so we need to prioritize features based on these three categories. Now, it's handy to use a sort of a simple 3 to 5 point scale for each of these categories. And in this example, I'll use a 3-point scale for each, but you can even mix them if you want. So for example, for development time, we could use short, medium, and long. Short can be, let's say, 1 to a few days, medium about a week, long a month or more. That's also very much depends on the type of product that you're building. If it's technically very complex product, like, for example, the product that Triggre is, then it's harder to do this correctly. Sort of to do it in a couple of days for a feature correctly, whereas for faster moving products, you can do something like a couple of days, a week, and then a month, which would be considered long. For us, those are a little bit different. So we would use different classifications for these. Similarly, for the total cost of ownership, you can use low, medium, and high, and you would link this obviously to your organization's budget. So your budget might range in anything that you can spend on it, and then you want to make sure that sort of you check what the total cost of ownership is, because obviously if you can build 3 features for the budget that you have versus 2, that might be worth it to think about building 3 instead of 2. So that's an important one to take into consideration. And for improved user experience, you could have a high improvement for the user experience, a medium, and a low one. And these can be based, for example, either on your subjective scoring. You can just say like, look, we designed a feature, we understand sort of that this improves the user experience because we've gotten some feedback on it. But if you really need to, you can always use something like a survey if you want to find out which features or improvements are considered by your users to improve the user experience the most. So you can go in different ways about this. For example, we often use a combination of feedback plus our own designs to plot things on this scale. And think about things like, do you find it important, for example, that users do fewer clicks in your product? Then maybe you can count clicks as a sort of a more objective way to calculate the improved user experience. Although I find that that's not always the right one. So you can use multiple things to build that, but that's a separate discussion. For now, just like assume that you can make a categorization high, medium, and low. So what we can then do is towards each of these categories, we can award points. So for example, we can say that a short development time is 5 points, for example. Medium development time would be 3, and long, we can say, is 1 point. For the total cost of ownership, we can use different amounts of points. We're not restricted to the same pointing system. So in that sense, let's say that our organization has a tight budget. And in this case, we can assign these points accordingly. So for example, we can use 4 points towards the low total cost of ownership, and then skip immediately to 2 for medium and no points for high total cost of ownership. So we really create quite a separation between the costs of ownership so that we value the ones that have low cost of ownership far more than others. For example, if you have a company which has gotten a large investment to quickly improve the product, this part is less relevant, and you would probably use a different category here to measure the prioritization of your features. In our case, we're tight budgeted, so we're going to use a score. For the last category, we use other amounts of points again. So suppose that our product is in some dire need for user experience updates because our users have indicated some things are really not that easy to use. In this case, what we can do is we can award 7 points to features that increase the user experience the most. And for those that have less impact, what we can use, 3 points and only 1 point, respectively. So this obviously creates an uneven balance toward features that improve the user experience the most, which is exactly what I want, right? In this case, if I say like, look, this is a very important sort of strategic tactical consideration for our product that we really need to improve the user experience, then we want to skew the prioritization very much towards those features that improve the user experience the most. So we want to make sort of the step from the green to the yellow one here. So from the high improvement to the medium one, a larger step than from the medium one to the lower one, so that you really favor those. Now let's take a look at how this can work for ranking 2 imaginary features, feature A and B. And let's start with feature A. It doesn't matter much what it is. It's just sort of a generic example. So let's say that feature A has a medium development time. It has medium total cost of ownership, and it does greatly improve our user experience, right? In this case, what we have is 3 points for duration, plus 2 points for the total cost of ownership, because that's also the medium one. And then obviously 7 points for the improved user experience, giving us for this feature 12 points. Then for feature B, right? Slightly different. This one has a short development time. It also has medium cost of ownership, and it has, let's say, a medium improvement to the user experience. So in other words, we have different points. Here we have 5 points for the development time, 2 points for the total cost of ownership, and 3 points for the improved user experience, giving us a total of 10 points for feature B. So if we sort of recap the scoring, feature A, right? Development time medium, total cost of ownership medium, and the improved user experience is high. For feature B, we have short, medium, and medium, respectively. And obviously this gives us the scoring of the points, which is 3, 2 plus 7, 12 for A, and 5, 2, and 3 for B, giving us 10. So in this case, for these 2 features, we would prioritize feature A over B, given our organizational goals of working with a tight budget and wanting to improve the user experience of our product. So this way, you can sort of prioritize that, and it would even have been like if you obviously this is just for 2 features, but if you have many features, then some might sort of score the same, and then you can dive into details. But this is a first sort of way to quickly prioritize which ones to get started with. So this is a simple scoring system that you can skew towards the goals that you have. Now, once features are in your product, you obviously want them to lead a long, healthy, and happy life, and them to make your users happy. But that also means that you have to be vigilant about the health of your features. Like, for example, how do you know a feature has had its time, right? When is it no longer relevant? That's a fair question. So the first way that you want to measure feature health, among other things, that you can achieve with this is getting user feedback. Obviously, you can use user feedback for more things, but the most common way to do that is a survey, right? You get more information from surveys, but you can get sort of an indication of feature health from a survey. You have to take into account that it takes effort. It takes effort to get a survey right without questions that lead to users in answering them. But if done well, it can improve. It can provide you with valuable feedback about features that your users like, which ones they like the most, and which ones they like the least. But think about not just asking sort of the direct question, right? So not going like, oh, do you like this or not? Rather, what you want to do is you want to really get your users to explain what it is they find valuable and why exactly. So that way you get a better understanding of your users' motivation. And this will help you when you're designing new features or when you redesign existing ones. When you know your motivation, you can sort of design towards that motivation. Now, feature requests are another important aspect of getting user feedback, even for checking the health of existing features, though this may not be immediately obvious. Sometimes users may request features that are already in your product, or they can be achieved with like a small workaround or in 2 steps instead of just a direct one. And these are really good indicators that the feature that you're talking about is not easy to find, or maybe it's not easy to use, which means that its health is deteriorating. So you might want to take a look at that. Another one that's not very obvious maybe is usability testing. That can also provide a lot of feedback about your product. And usually these are used for prototypes of products or features, because a usability test is sort of a controlled environment where you ask a user to perform a specific task using your product. And you record their efforts. So usually you record stuff like the screen, video, and audio. So you see their reaction to things. So while they perform the task, then they should also voice their thoughts out loud. So it's clear to see what their patterns of thinking are. I've done many of these in the past, and they are a great way for sort of more mature products to check, or more mature also prototypes to check how new users experience them and whether they can find and use the features of the product effectively straight off the bat. And especially when they start thinking out loud, you see their thought process go like, oh, I now probably need to do this. And so I'm looking for a button that says this. And then you might have named the button very differently. And you go like, oh, okay, I never thought about that. So usability tests can really give you a good idea on whether features are still as easy to use as they were in the beginning. Maybe your product has evolved. And these are usually for bigger products. After a while, it's good to do one of these tests with a couple of users to see sort of like, hey, is this still as easy to use as when our longer term users started using it? And of course, support requests that you get in, but also social media messages, for example, about your product, about your features from users. They are very useful ways to identify which features they might struggle with or which ones they are missing. If they are asking how to do something on forums and have to be explained, that sort of stuff is important to take in and then take into the design process for your product. Now, last session, we talked a lot about feature value, which was on a scale of 0 to the theoretical infinity. And the first point on the line that we talked about is the cost you incur for a feature. So basically running the feature. The second is the value as it is perceived by your users. And if you remember, if you were at the last session, then you remember that the pricing power that you have is the difference between the cost and this perceived value, right? So you can put a price on a feature anywhere on the spectrum. I would always, as I said then, put it not too high. And remember then that the difference between the perceived value and the price for your customer, that is their business case, right? For them, your price is their cost. So you want to make sure that that's big enough. Okay, so with this framework in mind, over time, what can happen to your features and your product in general, it will change. For example, costs can rise, and maybe the user's perceived value can change. For example, it can drop. Perceived value can change due to competitors having similar feature, for example, or they might offer a similar feature at a lower price even. Maybe just simply the time saved by using the feature for your users has become less relevant. You know, these things can all happen, and a lower perceived value or higher costs, they impact your pricing power. Right, so you have now got less pricing power, and it also has a direct effect on the customer business case, which in this case is also lower, even though we didn't even change the price. Right. So if over time you see a drop in perceived value, you may need to think about moving the feature between product tiers, or you can lower the price. And of course, ultimately, you can consider replacing or completely scrapping the feature from your product. For example, some systems may still offer connections to very old legacy systems. And while for some customers and some users, these are paramount because they have those systems, most of your users may no longer want to pay for these, and their perceived value is basically zero, right? So then in that case, you might want to target it only on those customers that use it, but forget about it for the rest of the users so they don't get the feeling that they're paying for it. Now, when costs rise, you may need to increase the price of a feature if you have enough pricing power. This is why pricing power is so important to take into account. But alternatively, you have to come up with ways either to lower the costs, for example, by redesigning the feature, or in the worst case, removing it from your product. In such a case, it's probably best to phase out the feature and only keep it for those customers that still use it, right? Let's say you have that legacy thing, connection, which only a few users, and just phase it out. So make it no longer available for new users. Keep it with the current customer base. And in that example of the connection to legacy systems, phasing it down can be done by replacing it by another way of connecting to the legacy system, for example, that doesn't have the same associated costs as the original feature does, maybe with a third-party platform or something along those lines, instead of having it in your platform or your product where it requires you to keep maintaining it. There's different ways that you can do that, but it's important to think about that when you see changes in costs or changes in perceived value. So as you start building your product and you're adding features, right? So we have a first feature. You're starting to add features, and at the start, these features will all make sense to add under all the conditions that we've discussed before. Over time, however, it may become apparent that a feature no longer really fits in the product. So in such cases, the question whether the feature is still necessary for the product to function becomes relevant. And if not, and users have an alternative, a better way to reach their goal, then the feature should be removed. Why keep a feature if there's a better alternative, right? But if the feature is still necessary, but the fit isn't good anymore, for example, due to technical debt, or the feature doesn't use the same workflow that other features use, then it's important to redesign the feature to fit the product again. So evaluating the fit of features, make sure that your product stays consistent over time and you don't end up with something like this, where every feature is sort of working in a slightly different way and it's not really a consistent system. So consistency is very important for your users, for their experience and everything, and you want to make sure that you prevent that from getting out of hand, and that's why you need to evaluate the health of these features periodically. Now, that periodic health check that you want to do is basically a small process that you do on the features of your product. For example, once a year. It doesn't even have to be that sort of formal, but it is a little process that you have to go through. The first step is to determine whether the features still add value to your product, right? Very important one. And we've talked about it today at length. And then the second step is then to decide, are you going to remove it? Are you going to design it? Or is it okay? You can keep it, of course, but let's say that you've determined that it needs a change. And then finally, you'll need to implement the removal or the newly designed feature to replace the old one. Now, this doesn't have to be a very long process, and it can be done in iterations. I actually recommend that. For example, you could first check if there are any features that are truly no longer necessary in the product, and then quickly remove those, right? Sort of like that would be your first step to act on, or at least nominate them for removal so you don't have to look at them in detail for value and other things. So then you can do a next step where you really do go into the depth of the value, but then you can skip the ones that you've nominated for removal, so it takes you less time to score the other ones. And this way, it allows you to quickly go through these your list of features, existing features, and check their health, and decide what are you going to do with it. Now, when you've decided that you want to remove a feature, there's a very high probability that it's still seeing active use. It almost never happens that you remove a feature that no one is using anymore. So let's see how best to tackle that. Now, the first step when you are starting to consider removing a feature, and this is very important, is to identify the users that are still using your feature. You want to know who they are and specifically what they use the feature for. Now, you may not need it, but you want to be able at least to communicate specifically to this group of users. So I would always advise to put them in, for example, a specific email group, just in case you need to only send something to that user. Usually, I say communication should go to all users, and we'll get to that later. But in this case, just in case you need it, it's good to have a group specifically with the users of this feature. And obviously, as I said, and I can't stress this enough, you need to understand why they use the feature because you're going to remove something for them. So these users who are using your feature, right, they do that to achieve a certain goal. Now, if you retire your feature without giving them an alternative, they may no longer be able to reach that goal. And that is why it's so important to provide an alternative way or an alternative feature for them to achieve the same goal. Preferably one that's more reliable, maybe faster, or better in another way than the original feature. And then we come to obviously communication. So let's say that we have decided that feature is going to get removed and is going to get replaced. Then we need to consider the timeline from left to right before and after the removal of the feature. Okay, now it's important to start communicating early about the removal. So preferably, I would do this months in advance to give your users time to adjust. Especially if, like, the bigger it is, the feature, the more time they might need to adjust. And communication around the removal of the feature must be repeated leading up to the event. As that removal event comes closer, you want to ramp up the amount of communication. This way, you make sure that no one misses being informed by you about the removal, right? That's very important. And also, it sort of feels like it's coming close if you get more communication about it. Then, after the feature is removed, you want to again inform your users. In this communication, you want to highlight mostly the alternative way to achieve the same goal, focus on the positive things in the alternative. And you want to repeat this positive reinforcement that the alternative is a better way of getting the same result in subsequent communication. For example, talking about cases using the alternative, showing tips and tricks. And all of this communication can and preferably should be done in your regular product updates, not in a specific thing to only these users. As I said before, it needs to be sent to everyone. Now, the reason again that you have that specific group of users that use this feature is only in case you absolutely need to communicate something to them that you cannot communicate or don't want to communicate to others. In general, you should communicate these things to all of your users. And the reason for this is because you want to show to other users how you handle the removal of a feature. If you nail the communication, this will actually build trust instead of damaging it. So it's very important to just do this out in the open. Don't be afraid of it. And especially if you have a good alternative, people will actually appreciate the fact that you explain this out in the open, but you do need to communicate about it very clearly, both before and after removing the feature. Now, after the event, after the remove event, it doesn't need to be specifically sort of referencing the removal of the feature, like, oh, we used to have this feature. No, but you need to stress the alternative so that people get used to, oh, this is now the way that we do this in the product, and this is how we achieve our goal from now on. Finally, when you are preparing to remove a feature, there are two things that can make the experience even more frictionless for your users. The first is offering easily accessible support from the first moment you start to communicate about the removal of a feature. This is super important. If anyone has any question about the removal, the alternative feature or solution, they should know where to go to get the answers they need. As soon as you start opening that box of Pandora that is going to go away, this feature, and there's going to be an alternative, you need to have a place that people can go to get their questions answered. And the second, if it's applicable, you may want to offer a migration service from the removed feature to the new solution. So this doesn't apply to everything, but like I said, let's say the example again of a legacy connection system. You might want to provide a migration service where you help your customer or your user to migrate to the new solution, because this might be tough for them, or there might be details to consider. So that way they are really guaranteed a smooth transition into the new situation. Finally, I wanted to say one last thing, and that is, I think that in many products and in many applications, removing features is a thing that's not talked about. And there's this idea of feature creep, which means that you sort of add on features, and it just sort of bulks out. And for people who are old enough, might remember ICQ, which had that. It slapped on feature after feature after feature, and then ultimately it got replaced by Microsoft Messenger, MSN Messenger, because it was just super simple. It only did messaging, which was what ICQ did in the beginning anyway. So those things are very interesting to see, and it means that you have to think really hard about like the consistency of your product or application, because you want to make sure that that stays intact. So from time to time, removing a button in favor of an automated process, to achieve the same goals, removing features that are absolutely no longer needed or don't provide value. These are very important things, and they're often overlooked. So I can't stress this enough, that the great product managers that I know do look at their products in ways that they say, look, always considering things like, is this feature still relevant as soon as we start working on something, a new thing? Can this replace something else? Can this maybe be done in a better way for the users? These are things to constantly consider. This concludes our summer school. I hope you enjoyed these sessions and have learned a few new things, mainly about managing products. And for more tips on how to work with designing products and features, automation related tips and tricks, please follow Triggre on a channel if you're liking. We're going to go into the Q&A right now to see if there's some things that people have still got to ask. But make sure also to watch the other two ones that I did, because they do add and build up to this one if you haven't done so already. Let's see. We have a question from Matteo who asks, is it better to retire multiple features at once or one by one? Yeah, this is an interesting question. So there's theory obviously about you should bring bad news. Let's assume that removing a feature will be bad news. Always in buckets and never drip it. So I would say Um, you could do it together, but you have to be very careful there's not too big of a change. If it's like two, three big changes that a customer or a user has to make in order to then use a new product, that might be bad for them as well. So it really depends on the size of the change that these features bring for your users. If there's no impact on them, yes, you should definitely do them all at once and communicate it in one go. Good question. Let's see. This one's interesting by Clara. What's the best way to track feature usage data? Well, we've talked a little bit about this before as well. It's you can say like, hey, I just check like whether people still click the feature and everything. The problem is maybe people don't want to use your feature, but they have to use your feature, right? So maybe they don't like it. I had an example once in a system that I developed for point of sales. So it's like a sort of a cash register digital system in the early 2000s, and basically there was a button which would allow you to invoice the open orders that were set to be as invoice. And yeah, basically what happened was that people would, at the end of the day, do that process. And then we're like, yeah, do you really need the feature to click that manually? So we made a feature that sort of did it automatically, unless you opted out for one of the customers to do it manually or set it to a weekly schedule. And so now it was automated and it saved people time. So that feature of doing it, sort of clicking the button and selecting which orders you wanted to invoice, we just replaced it because we saw everyone always used all open orders and then invoiced that at one go. So that's a good way that, yes, everyone used it. And if I looked at the clicks, it was very high. But when I talked to users, they were like, you know what? I have to use it. I don't really like it. So the best way to track feature usage, I would say, is a combination of seeing how many users actively use it with feedback from either can they find it, do they like it, plus sort of if they use it. So if there are many clicks on it and it sees high usage, is that because they like it or is that because they need to use it? You need to combine those two. Let's see. Annika asks, what if a feature is popular but misaligned with the product? Well, I think we talked about this a little bit. So in this case, let's say that it's very popular and you opt to replace it because it's misaligned, right? I think that there's usually a big opportunity to improve the user experience in that way. Assuming that the user experience of the other parts of the product are also popular, they're liked by people. So it's sort of the oddball out. Then I would say that if you make it more streamlined, it is a great way to improve the usability of your product. And I would also sort of communicate it in that way. Like, look, we've now streamlined the use of this feature much more in line with other parts of the application to help you understand the application faster and make it easier to use. So yeah, you can do that. I would say redesign it so that it fits the product, and then in your communication, make that a very positive one, because it is. Last one. This one. Have you ever regretted removing a feature? Yes, I have. There was this one in Triggre. We once had you could make Gantt charts, and we had opted then to remove the library that we used back then for basically only for this Gantt chart, because it had some problems in the product and only one user was using it at the time. So we offered an alternative to that user and removed it. But then we found that there were multiple cases that could have been done really well with a Gantt chart. And so that is a feature that we've removed, and spoiler alert, will be reintroduced soon. But that's something that that in hindsight was better not to remove. Although I think it's only the exception to the rule, because we've removed many things. I've removed many things from other products that I've managed before in my other companies. And usually the outcome is that you just get a better product, a better application. It's just more streamlined, it's more automated, it's better to use, easier to use, more stable. That was one of the problems that we ran into this at this point. So yeah, I still think that in general, you should from time to time remove features. But yes, I have regretted doing it once in my life. I think this is all the questions that we got today. Thank you so much. Again, this is the last one, the last of our summer schools for this summer. I hope you enjoyed them. Make sure to rewatch the other ones as well, because we go all the way through how to design features in a simple way to how you value, how you sort of determine the value that your features add, what the model is for that. And today we talked about the feature lifecycle. So this should get you sort of a complete overview of all the aspects that come with introducing, designing, managing features, all the way from how they get from ideation all the way to when they're retired. Thank you for watching. We'll be back with more live streams throughout 2025 and also next year. So please stay tuned. Follow Triggre on the channels that you